We should be live on YouTube now.
Thank you. I would like to start by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching this live stream of this meeting through the Council's YouTube page. As you'll be aware, we are meeting virtually in line with the government's guidance. Members, please, would you keep your video cameras switched on at all times, with your microphones muted, except when you're invited to speak. You can indicate your wish to speak by raising your virtual hand. I will then invite you to speak. Please unmute your microphone, make your comments or questions, and then mute yourself. Should we encounter any technical problems, I may adjourn the meeting while this is addressed. If your connection fails during the meeting and you are unable to reconnect, one of the Democratic Services team will contact you. Finally, I would remind all members that virtual meetings are recorded. So, I will now hand over to Pippa, who will do a roll call. Pippa, please.
Thank you, Councillor Holdit. Yes, so members, if you could just confirm your presence when I call your name. Councillor Allen?
In attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Ayres?
Present.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor Bashir. So Councillor Sereste?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Farouk?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald?
Yes, in attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Hiller?
Yes, I'm here, Pippa.
Thank you. Councillor Holdit, yourself?
Correct, I'm in.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton?
Present.
Thank you very much. And also apologies from Councillor Walsh.
Indeed. Okay. So apologies to be recorded of Councillor Walsh and Councillor Bashir. Yep. Any declarations of interest, members? Don't see any indication, so I'll take that as there aren't any. I think at this point in time, I'm going to ask Councillor Fitzgerald if he'd make a statement about preschool meals, because I think the comments in the media and so on are getting out of hand for a council that really does care about its young people and the fact we'll never let them go hungry. So, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, John. Yes, I'm delighted to say a few words because I know a number of councillors and colleagues and both our MPs and others will have been receiving all sorts of messages over the weekend. But what I would like to say, as John has said, and we will be issuing a formal statement this morning about the council's position, is that the fundamental thing is this: no family or child will go hungry in Peterborough. This Conservative administration cares about the people who live here, and we take seriously our responsibilities to make sure all of our residents are looked after, particularly those families that are blessed with children. Government cannot be expected to fund everything forever, which is why local authorities like Peterborough have stepped up efforts to fill any gaps since March. And we've had support from both our MPs in attracting extra funding, and I'm sure my cabinet colleague Councillor Seaton will in a moment also be announcing some good news. This unprecedented funding come into local councils since March. There's never enough money, we all know that, but we have money to be able to support people who we have responsibility for. And also, people should bear in mind, we have an extensive and unparalleled benefits and welfare system in the country here. We're blessed with that. And more money has gone into that than ever before. And it's there for those on low incomes and families that struggle ordinarily. But most families choose what they do with their money, and they manage perfectly well, and they can look after themselves and their children daily. But we know who those families are that are struggling, and we're in touch with them. But what we will do this week is we will redouble our efforts to remind them about the help and support that is on offer, because we've had a community hub in place where people have been donating food, essential supplies and everything else since March. And that is the conduit in which, if you are a business or anything else, you want to give things, talk to our community hub. And there'll be a press release and it'll be on our social media where you can do that. So there is no issue in Peterborough, and there's nothing we can't deal with, and there's no need for anybody to go hungry or go without food. More details and a fuller statement we'll be giving as soon as we can manage to get that out this morning. Thank you, John.
Thank you. I'll now go back to the agenda, and we're on agenda item 4, the medium-term financial strategy. Councillor Seaton, would you please?
Hold it. Just to interrupt, you've got agenda item 3, which is petitions, but that's just to confirm we've not got any.
Well, there aren't any.
No, there are none, just to confirm.
That's right. That's it. So having introduced 4, Councillor Seaton, will you please introduce this item?
Thank you, Leader. So this is the medium-term financial strategy, phase 1. My apologies that this introduction is so long, but it is a critical time for local government and important that I publicly outlined context. Let's just first remind ourselves that at the start of the year, we projected a £14 million gap in 21-22 and had identified £12 million of savings. We had 12 months to close the gap and were confident of doing so, and I'll expand on that later. Last week at full council, the Labour and Liberal Democrat leaders showed they totally lost sight of our past good work. But as the Shadow Health Secretary said to Labour activists, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Reflecting briefly on the national picture, we're not alone in facing unprecedented financial pressures with COVID, having had a significant impact on all council finances. The latest analysis published by the Local Government Association identified additional pressures and lost income in excess of £11 billion just this year. For example, adult social care pressures totaling £2.3 billion, income losses of £1.6 billion in respect of business rates, and £1.6 billion in respect of council tax. And another example is lost sales fees and charges income totaling £2 billion. Some of these will have lasting effects for councils, impacting base budgets and making it ever more important that clarity on support from government is received. There should have been a comprehensive spending review this year, but the uncertainty due to COVID means that isn't possible. I must admit, I've been confident that would have a very significant positive effect for us. So instead, the local government settlement will be for a single year. No date has been confirmed, although we expect it in December with a technical consultation in the autumn. We've asked government that it be as early as possible to aid planning. That settlement provides a crucial link into our 21-22 medium-term financial strategy, as it should give clarity on key areas, including confirmation of grants and whether these roll over unchanged or have an inflationary or growth uplift, confirmation on the timescales for the fairer funding review. We know we're substantially underfunded for a council with our demographics. Confirmation on timescales for the reset of the business rate baseline. Confirmation of the continuation of the new homes bonus or details of the replacement scheme. Confirmation of council tax referendum limits and the continuation of the business rates pilots. And finally, approval of business rate pool allocations. Only following the provisional settlement will councils have clarity on support from the government and any final deficit amount that needs to be closed. I'll just give further national context to the size of the challenge posed by COVID. You know, I said this last week at full council. A BBC survey in June found that of 173 councils who responded, 158 could not fund services this year, and we're not one of those. Finally, I think it's important just to mention auditors for all councils require a going concern statement to be included within the 2019-20 statement of accounts. When that gets signed off and goes to audit committee, Again, that's unprecedented. The concept of going concern assumes that an authority's functions and services will continue in operational existence for the foreseeable future. So moving on to our Peterborough Takes Action lobbying activity, we'd already held informal talks with MHCLG over several months. However, on the 1st of October, we formally approached them to explore options for 21-22 and how we deliver a balanced budget. We need funding to ensure that local services meet statutory and legal obligations. The council can meet the ongoing challenges of COVID, and our recovery plans are funded so we can build back better. And thankfully, the response was immediate and positive. I believe the email sent to them, we had a response within 30 minutes. As part of Peterborough Takes Action, we've also consulted on the council's financial position and the approach being made to MHCLG. For example, with leading members in the local authority, Cabinet has talked about it, we've talked about it with group leaders and full council. We've talked to the council's external auditors, the MPs, senior financial colleagues in other local authorities, SIPFA, Solace and other professional bodies. And we've also engaged with the Local Government Association and local authority special interest groups. We suggested a number of solutions to MHCLG to bridge the immediate funding gap for the council and wider local government prior to addressing the underlying medium-term funding shortfall. And I think at this point, I just want to acknowledge our acting finance director, Peter Carpenter, whose experience has been invaluable in this regard. Indeed, it's my view, he's been a leading voice in his profession and in identifying solutions for local government. MHCLG recognise that even with the considerable support already provided to local government, there will be individual authorities with unique circumstances, which is why they're encouraging councils to discuss their future financial positions. It's clearly very encouraging that they're working closely with us as we support our community through the tough times caused by the pandemic. Moving on to the detailed 21-22 financial position. As I said earlier, Council on the 4th of March approved the MTFS 2021 to 22-23 strategy, setting out a balanced budget next year, for this year, while at the same time outlining budget gaps in excess of £14 million from 21-22 onwards, which would require the council to make further savings in order to balance the budget. We've clearly been operating in challenging financial circumstances for a number of years, and immediate action was required to reduce the costs of operations in the medium term. You'll recall the capitalisation direction awarded in March 2020 to support us in implementing the radical restructuring and service changes required to deliver a sustainable budget whilst maintaining the minimum required reserves. At that time, we committed to an intensive 6-week period of investigative and service review work to inform the development of a new operating model. This work was led by Cabinet and the corporate management team and was facilitated by outside experts, including the Local Government Association. By March 2020, £12 million of savings have been identified for more detailed business case development and implementation in this financial year, leaving just £2 million to find within 12 months. As I referred to in my opening remarks, we all know to our great regret what then happened. In March, a lockdown of the country due to the COVID pandemic, and the impact of this and the comprehensive response the council was required to make reduced those savings of 12 million to an estimated 2.7 million. And you can ask why. Reallocation of resource, extra demands on resource, expertise reprioritised from those projects to critical areas such as supporting those shielding. In addition, responding to the pandemic has seen the needs of vulnerable adults and children increased support to adult providers of care, a decrease in the ability to achieve additional income planned, and decreased receipts for payments owed to the council. There's also been an increase in demand on corporate services to support the activities and services required during the pandemic. There's been redeployment of employees to increase the operational capacity of service delivery and an increased need for communications and analytical work overall. The pandemic has created other strains on the longer term income and expenditure budgets too. As a result, we face an estimated budget gap of 35.7 million in 21-22. This report outlines this financial position and the revised assumptions. Due to the significant levels of uncertainty in the council's operating environment, the assumptions reflect the most up-to-date information available at this time, and as such may be subject to change in phase 2 of the budget, which goes to full council next March. Just to summarise, the main factors for the increased gap are, as I've said, the lean review savings impact of around 9 million, service pressures and service demand of up to 12 million, revised funding assumptions in relation to future council tax and business rate baselines of 3.8 million, payments spread over 3 years of non-collection of nearly £10 million business rates and council tax this year, that's 3.3 million a year, and 5 million of existing MTFS savings that can't be delivered. You know, as a council, we believe that we must be honest with stakeholders and residents on our financial position. And therefore, we've gone out to consultation for phase 1 when many other councils have not. It's important for all to understand the position so we can deal with it properly. I've looked at a whole range of other councils. I've seen one council that has not mentioned their finances once, and it's going to report it first to Cabinet in November. There are councils that have said they'll report monthly, and there's been nothing going forward. So I think we're really being open and honest and fair in our approach. But let's be clear that this situation is entirely due to the pandemic. We're a well-run council, and compared to neighbours have specific factors that set us apart. I just wanted to set a few of those out. You know, we already provide services at a low unit cost, confirming we're efficient and we give value for money. External benchmarking across all councils shows our unit costs nearly 12% lower than average, and we rank 92nd highest out of 123 comparable authorities. We've got a fast growing population with an increasing demand for services and complexity of care and support required. We've been consistently one of the fastest growing cities in the country for a number of years now. We have a low council tax base, which means any tax increase leads to relatively lower income. We've got a high proportion of Band A and B properties, but we do have the 8th lowest average Band D council tax rate. And that's fantastic for residents, but it does have a financial impact. If Peterborough was able to move to the average unitary council tax rate, that's a difference of £136 a year, nearly 10%. And applied this to the tax base, it would generate an additional £8 million per year. We have low government funding in comparison to service need and population. I think that will be addressed by the Fairer Funding Review, and the council's funding position is outlined in section 5.3. As I said, whilst low council tax is good for residents, it's also meant low levels of usable reserves as outlined in section 6 of the robustness statement. To date, we've been successful in setting a balanced budget, but in doing so, we have exhausted a lot of the financial measures available. We've sought advice and challenge from a range of external professionals with extensive local government knowledge and experience. We've not been afraid to look to outside people to come in and challenge us. Are we doing all we can? For example, Local Government Association, we had Grant Thornton in, who are experts in local government. We've had specialist housing advice, HR advice, and strategic financial advice as recommended by the Local Government Association. We have to remember that our financial improvement programme, working alongside those specialists, delivered £33 million of savings in 2021. That was approved last March, and our lean review identified 12 million. We've constantly challenged ourselves to be efficient and innovative whilst ensuring services continue to meet the needs of our residents. We've also ensured strong controls on expenditure, which have been in place for some considerable time, nearly 2 years, updated to take account of logging COVID pressures and ensuring that expenditure is only made for essential purposes. I'd remind you that they include a panel to review all recruitment requests, business cases for all expenditure in excess of £10,000, and service-based heads of finance provide additional scrutiny and challenge of business cases with regular review from our Chief Financial Officer. We've got enhanced controls for general expenditure, with Pete Carpenter looking at all expenditure over £1,000. Implementation of the review of the effectiveness and operation of financial and human resource controls across the operation, and continued enhanced budget governance with dedicated boards overseeing the delivery of the budget setting process and monitoring savings delivery. Phase 1 of the budget also includes the draft capital programme. New schemes are set out in Table 8, the majority of which were approved at Council last week. Unusually for Phase 1 of the budget, given the overall financial position for Peterborough and local government as a whole, our Chief Financial Officer has given an opinion on the Council's position. This would usually only come in Phase 2 of the budget. His opinion is that the 21-22 budget estimates contain considerable risk due to the level of uncertainty in the Council's operating environment, making it problematic to develop meaningful assumptions on which to base income receipt levels and demand-led expenditure budgets. I covered the challenges to making assumptions in reply to a question in full council last week. This will be the case for nearly all councils. And I'd say that again, it'll be the case for nearly all councils. Examples of the uncertainties include increases in demand for council services, market sustainability of key service providers, the inability to forecast with any certainty the future profile of recovery for income generators, example of that is car parking, uncertainty with how to profile business rate income given the reduction in government support and associated closures of businesses due to COVID, uncertainty with the increase to local council tax support scheme with any future recession. It should be noted that with the council tax support scheme, we've actually given £150 to each person who is on that scheme to support them. Continued uncertainty from the overall impact in funding of the local government sector from central government, although I'm still confident there will be further funding this year. Unknown financial and demand impact from any future national or local lockdown. Unknown indirect impacts from any future global recession with no previous experience to base it on, and this is global. No resources to implement any recovery or transformational activity, a key area of our discussions with government. Having said all that, I want to end with good news. The government confirmed on the 20th of October that our share this year of the recently announced additional funding for local government is 5.7 million. That means our overall reserve levels at the end of 21-22 will rise so at the end of this year, will rise from the 7.1 million shown in this report to 12.8 million. Just remind ourselves, our COVID expenditure to date is therefore 86% funded. And I'm hopeful there will be further grant announcements as we need to build up our reserves for next year. So my apologies to Cabinet members. That has been a very long speech, but I think it's important we get all those points on the record. So Cabinet are asked to approve recommendations 1 to 4 and note recommendations 5 and 6. Thank you, Leader. I'm very happy, as is Pete Carpenter, to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Seaton. I think that was a brilliant sum up of the situation, and I've heard worse on Budget Day in the House of Commons. So thank you for that. And I'd just like to add to your comments. Some of the comments that were made in Poole Council on Wednesday night, do have a demoting effect on our staff. Who are working very hard under very difficult circumstances. And we need to remind the other side that in 2002, they virtually bankrupted this council and walked away from it because they couldn't fund it. And also in housing transfer, they refused to put the rents up, which led to housing transfer, because only 40% of our houses were then deemed as fit. Also, if you look at the amount of grant we've lost and the amount of extra services we've taken on as well, I don't think there's another council in this land that could have maintained its services as we have and kept the council tax low. And don't forget, our funding is on population figures, which are probably 8-9 years out of date. Having said my little piece, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Yeah, thank you, John. I would echo all those sentiments, and indeed, again, congratulations to Pete and his team and the rest of the officers for dealing with this in such a professional manner and, getting us to where we need to be. I do have a question, though, which is probably for Peter Carpenter. David talked about the approaches that we're taking. So are we alone here with our approach to MHCLG? And are you sure that this is the right course of action, Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. We aren't alone in this course of action, but just very importantly, this course of action that we're taking now is because the stance was changed in terms of what MHCLG required from councils about 4 to 6 weeks ago. Up to that time, MHCLG were very, very focused on making sure that councils did not run out of money or did not fall into an issue in the 2021 financial year. In the midsummer, that view started to change to say, please come and talk to us if you have got a problem in balancing the budget in 21-22. Now, throughout this financial year, we've been monitoring on a monthly basis, and we've shown that we think we're going to have a problem next year. We can balance the books for this year, and the additional funding has helped that even more. It was prudent, therefore, to go and talk to the local MHCLG when we did, to make sure that they understand our position, where we come from and what our pressures are. My intelligence suggests we are at the front end of the queue of people talking to MHCLG, although substantial numbers of other councils are now starting to meet with them, and that will increase over the next month or two. So yes, I think that is the prudent way to move forward, because in the end, we have control over council tax and business rates and our commercial income, but in reality, central government are looking at the wider funding issues of the sector.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, John, and thank you, David, for a very comprehensive and excellent report. My question is, I just have a small question. Have we had any feedback or any clarity what we might get through this financial settlement? I know I'm pleased that we've got 5.6 million last week, David, as you indicated, as it seems that this is going to be the crucial component in the 2021-22 budget. Thank you, Pete.
Peter?
Shall I take that, David? Thank you, Councillor Farouk. Yes, it's only really been confirmed over the last week that this is a 1 year only settlement, and at the moment, MHCLG, along with all other central government departments, are in negotiation with the Treasury to see what each of the departments is going to get in terms of a settlement. We don't really know yet what the outcomes will be, either for the sector as a whole or how that money is going to be split across the sector. It's quite interesting that at the moment we have now given 6 returns to central government in terms of how our pressures are mounting in terms of COVID-19. And there's been a change in terms of how the government are looking at relative needs at the moment in terms of looking at the data on those returns. And so hopefully they will take an account of how we are spending our money as well as our overall financial position. However, we will not know that probably until early December.
Thank you very much. Councillor Farouk, I think you indicated you've got another question.
Yes, David mentioned about the tax collection side of things, and I know it's been very difficult and it's one of the biggest unknowns and it's very difficult to predict. But my question is, where do we think this might go, the tax collection over the coming year?
Mr. Carpenter or David?
Do you want me to take that,
I'll
David?
take that.
Go on,
Shall I take that, Pete, and then you can chip in. I mean, we're seeing presently a 1.9% reduction in council tax collection and a 20.6% reduction in business rate collection year on year. And obviously that's causing a significant pressure as it affects the council's 2 main sources of funding. And it's causing a £10 million shortfall this year, which we'll have to fund over a 3-year period. You're right that the worry here is what the shortfalls will be in future years. And we've been fortunate that we've seen growth in the city. So we've seen growth in council tax income. We've seen growth in business rate income. How much will that be offset by any future, I won't call it a recession because I don't think it's a recession. That's 2 quarters of negative growth. But the impact on businesses locally that the financial problems could lead to. I mean, another worry is council tax support. As I said, we've given £150 to each household on council tax support. But if more people are made unemployed, then those numbers could go up. And that's another worry. Peter, did you want to touch on it? It's probably also worth saying that we have been very careful in recent months in chasing people for council tax and business rates. We've really acknowledged that there's a lot of pressure out there. We will be, we're already starting to just remind people that there are bills that need paying. It's really important that they pay those bills because that is what supports vital services, the sort of thing that Councillor Fitzgerald mentioned at the start, supporting children, supporting social care. So really important things during the current pandemic. Peter, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. I think it's quite critical for next year. If you look at this year, we've supported local businesses in terms of hospitality, retail, leisure and nurseries by £40 million in terms of rates relief. We've had £33 million worth of BEES grants to small, rural and those industries. In terms of 40 million, that makeup is about a third of our total NNDR or business rate take. And so my concern is what is the support that's going to be in place in the local government settlement next year, because obviously we are in the middle of a system that is under incredible strain in terms of the business community. And obviously it's much better to keep people in jobs because the knock-on effect for us in local government is quite extreme. And so I am concerned in terms of next year, in terms of what sort of reliefs are going to be there and where they're going to be.
Thank you.
Can I ask you to add to that, Mr. Carpenter, in terms of it's in the budget book as a low tax base. That suggests to the people outside that we're not collecting it. But as I understand it, it's because we have a very high percentage of homes in band A and B compared with anybody else. And that's why our council base is low. Is there any evidence with the developments going on that that's beginning to balance out?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, the low council tax base is because we have predominantly, it's about 65% of our properties are in band A and band B, and that's historical. A lot of the newer building schemes that are going on at the moment are larger, have a larger factor of 3, 4, 5 bedroom, which will obviously start to bring our tax base up over time. But that's quite a long-term process because we have over 80,000 properties, and so obviously we've got a highly significant number of that in the lower two bands at the moment. Over time, that will start to increase up.
Thank you, Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you. Can I add my voice, please, Peter, to thanking you and to tell you how impressed I've been with you and with your team, how you've actually dealt with the finances of the council, particularly in the last 6 months when it's been very, very hard, and you've done, in my view, extremely well. Looking at the report itself, can you tell me what are the major pressures within that £11 million gap that you're referring to, please? I think that's for you, Peter, or David.
Peter, do you want to kick off on that?
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Ayres, and thank you for your sentiments. And again, it's wider than just a finance team. The whole council has been filling in my returns on a weekly and monthly basis to make sure that we put our position in the best possible way to central government, which is always the most important thing to do. In terms of the 11 million, we've got 5.1 million to ensure market sustainability for adult social care, 2 million for children's placements, 0.7 million to protect family safeguarding, 1.5 million to fund Aragon Direct Services properly following review after 1 full year of trading. We've got 700k to increase for pay award. We'd assume 2% of the pay award, which was nationally negotiated about 6 weeks ago, was 2.75%. And we've got a £500,000 reduction in energy sales from the energy from waste plant and Serco contracts as well. Those are the major components. The other bits add up to about 300 or 400k.
Thank you very much for that.
Mr. Carpenter, you mentioned Aragon and the fact that you were going to put more money into that. If you look at the reporting in the PT, it gives the impression we should have known that we're subsidising it. But as I understand it, we didn't have the figures until we took over to understand just how much they did subsidise it. Is that correct?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, that is correct. In terms of when we took the services back on, if you people remember back to the original reports that came out about 16 months ago, we said that we would be reviewing services once we'd had a steady flow of services for a number of months. What's become apparent is that two factors in particular. The first factor is that Amy were subsidising central overheads quite significantly. And the second factor is the other thing that supported the contract to quite a large degree was income from doing work on property, and that has reduced over time from the council as well as the budgets have become tighter.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton, would you like to just address how confident we are on the underlying base assumptions coming to 35.7 million?
I think, this is a really difficult area, and it's something that Peter and I have talked about on a very regular basis. I think we're as confident as we can be at this point in time. There are things like, if we can keep the COVID numbers down in Peterborough to the current levels, we'll be in a far better position than if we hit the sort of numbers being seen in the northeast, where they've had to go into the higher tiers. That's a really important issue for us. I think another thing that's important is MHCLG have been looking at council finances in a level of detail they've never had before. You know, they're getting monthly reports from us, so they really can see the detail of individual councils' positions. And I think that's really helping their understanding of where future finance needs to go. That's certainly reflected in the extra 5.7 million we've received. That is more than we expected, given some of the past grant funding that's been announced during the COVID crisis. I think, you know, we've had detailed reviews of those assumptions. I think they are as robust as we can get them at this current time. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I don't have any other people indicating that they wish to speak. So I wish to move to the recommendations, which obviously are set out in your budget book, and all the appendices A, B, C, D, E, F and G. Can I have a proposal that we accept those, please? Somebody propose?
Happy to, John.
Okay, Councillor Fitzgerald, a seconder, please.
Oh, Peter will second, I think.
Sorry, you're going to do it through?
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, thank you, John.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I think it's important that those are outside the, like David's obviously presenting it. So I think it's better that other people do it. Everybody in favour? Okay,
There's no objection.
okay, thank you. Then I take that as being covered. So we're now going to 5, which is a strategic financial approach taken by the council. And I think that's, again, you, Councillor Seaton, is it not? David?
Seaton.
Thank you, Pepper. Thank you, Leader. So this is the budget control report, and it's updating Cabinet on the in-year position for our finances. I've brought reports to Cabinet since May that set out the implications of COVID-19. As I've said before, we're internally tracking this on a weekly basis with regular updates by all councils in Cambridgeshire to the Gold Group and MPs. I won't go into the detail of this because we have had some of that debate. So, you know, current forecast pressure of £11 million. And we've just received £5.7 million to offset that. Just picking out one or two specific points, I think it's worth highlighting the present capital programme position. We've only spent something like 8.3 million of capital for the year to date. I think that's to be expected that projects have had to be closed down or not started. That is substantially below plan. And the other one is reserve levels. They were dropping to quite a low level, and the £5.7 million given in funding by the government will improve that substantially. So I think all I want to say is Cabinet are asked to note the recommendations in this report, especially, you know, the fact that we need to continue to lobby for additional funding to minimise the effects of COVID-19 on Peterborough, and we will continue to do that. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I think this is the item that got confused in full council, isn't it?
Yeah, it was interesting because budget control report at Cabinet always goes before full council so they can ask questions on it. And I think Councillor Sanford and quite a few others hadn't read the papers and decided that it was there for debate. It was, you know, and agreement. Actually, the only point that went before full council, the fact that we were putting money into 62 to 68 Bridge Street. Fantastic opportunity for us, as Councillor Teresti pointed out. You know, we really are the only party in Peterborough that is thinking about the future of this city. So there was a lot of confusion, but I think it showed a lot of opposition councillors don't read the papers before we get to full council.
I think that's true.
Thank you, Leader.
Councillor Allen.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And Councillor Seaton, can I just ask what the main differences are in the position compared to last month?
That would be you, Peter.
I was going to say, I'll ask Pete Carpenter just to cover those off if he can. Thank you.
The main differences in terms of this month to last month, in terms of looking at the COVID position in particular, to start with, remember this was before the 5.7 million. We had confirmation on and put in our first return for the income loss scheme of 75%. So that reduced the amounts by 3.9 million. However, we had about offset by £1 million of temporary accommodation costs. The government grants became far less revenue based, and we'd assume 1.4 million of them. And a lot of them became very, very much capital based, which we are applying for. And so that was a £1 million additional cost. And also, again, we had an additional 1.7 million of grant for infection control, which was passported through, so net nil. And the other thing was increased costs in some of the adult areas to support for care providers.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it's a great report, in very comprehensive, and thanks very much, Pete, for its creation. Of course, thanks to Kirsten as well, who I'm sure had a huge input into this. Just one query, a quick query. Are you worried about the progress today on the delivery of the capital programme? I don't know whether that's for Pete or David, probably Pete.
Thank you, Councillor Hiller. Yes, Councillor Seaton did mention it earlier on, and we would usually now, even though obviously payments always lag delivery of schemes, we would probably be at the 30-35% level and not at the 8% level. And so at the moment, what we are looking at is how reassessing all the schemes for delivery in year. You've got to remember that probably 2/3 of our schemes have got significant amounts of match funding in. So part of that process is just to check with partners such as the combined authority that if the schemes do slip into next year, that they will actually continue to be funded.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Teresti.
Good morning. Thank you, Leader. Probably a question for Peter Carpenter. We are in the process of approaching winter. We've seen quite a substantial spike in the COVID cases around the country, and luckily Peterborough is not one of them at the moment. You know, do you expect our financial position to unduly deteriorate?
Thank you, Councillor Teresti. It all depends on what we're asked to do, I think, is a hedging my bets answer to that, but then I'll go into more detail. We've in our responses to central government said we've got about £38 million of additional pressures in this financial year. Of those, 16.5 million relate to the period from October through to March. So we've got significant sums we've assumed we will have to pay out, and from the work that all the service departments have done, this includes, you know, 6 million for adult care, 1 million for children's, 1 million for income loss, and the vast majority of the test and trace grants, which will probably be paid out over this period in the test and trace work. So we have got money there. We've been relatively prudent in putting those sums away, and it's interesting in looking at the central government returns. There has been a complaint from MHCLG to some metropolitan authorities that their numbers aren't changing over time, and it's really, really important that we actually, as Councillor Seaton has set out in both reports, but review things on a weekly and properly through the formal government processes on a monthly basis, just to make sure that everyone is really understanding of our position and where we're going. So at the moment, it's prudent in terms of what we've got. However, and we've seen there's government funding in terms of the present spikes that have been specific to other regional areas. There is funding of £1, £2 and then £8 for the various different levels that you come into, but we will review what is going on in other areas to make sure our voice is heard.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Yes, thank you, John. So I would echo again the words of my colleague David Seaton in terms of his assessment about the understanding of opposition parties as to our budget, where we are, what the process is, because it is clear from the last time we had to set our budget that the political makeup of the council has changed over time, and it's currently certainly the situation now, rather sadly, that we've lost Louise Coles, and we had a couple of people very, very sick at the last meeting, and I believe the opposition parties took advantage of this again in terms of the way they behaved in the chamber. So I'm hoping that by the time we get to December, common sense will prevail and the fact that they will realise what position the council is in. However, we'll wait and see. So my question here, though, in this section is, and David probably touched on it, but Peter, in terms of the current budget situation, what effect in terms of that additional funding that's been announced last week, what is the effect of that, particularly in year, just to reiterate that position, please?
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. The effect is, in overall terms, we're now 86% funded in terms of what our projected COVID pressures are for the year. The gap then comes down from 11 million to 5.4 million. The knock-on effect of that means that our usable reserves move up from 1.5 million to almost 8 million.
Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Leader, can I just add to that? I mean,
Yeah,
it's worth reminding people that we're only 6 months through the year.
Absolutely.
So we're 86% funded for in-year COVID pressures 6 months into the year. We've still got 6 months to go. So some of the scaremongering and the moaning at full council about what about covering the COVID shortfall this year, I think there will be further grant announcements, and I think the COVID pressures will be fully funded. Now, I may be putting myself on the line in saying that, but I'm pretty confident it will be the case. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to highlight before I close the debate? Councillor Seaton?
I think one thing that's just come out is the review of the capital programme. It's clear that it's important where we've got match funding and things like that, that, you know, we understand that that can be rolled over. What I would suggest is that we bring that to Cabinet in the next budget control report, just as an update. I think there's an important point that Pete Carpenter made. Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, Councillor Allen, I think you've got a late question.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. If I can bounce back to item 4, and I think it is crucial. Councillor Seaton, you covered off a very good, exacting presentation, but I would ask, and crucially, what is the view of the responsible financial officer, please, the 151 officer, on that item, please?
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I think I'll give two answers in overall terms. In terms of where we sit at the moment in terms of the 2021 budget, we have the resources, and the £5.7 million that we got last week means that we are moving into the end of the financial year with more resource available to start to implement recovery and transformation work than we would have had 2 weeks ago. However, it's still very low. In terms of the 21-22 position, we, like all councils, are in a significant deficit position at the moment, and it will only become really apparent where councils will sit when the local government provisional settlement comes out in late November, early December. Only then we will know the true gap in terms of what government is going to fund and what government isn't going to fund in terms of a lot of key things, including the council tax collection fund deficits for this year. So I think a key period will be for us at the end of November, start of December, when those numbers come through, and we know then what we've got to do for the next financial year in terms of that final gap and what its magnitude is. And at the moment, you know, most of local government is sitting there saying, you know, we've got to be funded, and we are no different from the vast majority of other councils in that phase. I think the issue that central government have got at the moment, and I've looked at a number of councils this morning to see, you're always looking for comparators and people you can join up with. The difference between individual councils of what they hold reserves for and how much they've got means that it's quite a difficult job for central government to actually come up with this settlement, because it's quite apparent from tranche 4 of the funding, given money on a slightly different needs basis than what they did earlier in the COVID process. And part of that does take account of their views as they get more and more information on what councils are actually holding and what councils can give up.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your honest and straightforward answer. I think clearly we're in good hands with yourself, and thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. Final word to you, David Seaton.
Thank you, Leader. I think that's a really important issue that's just been touched on. One of the things that we appear to forget at times is the changing situation this year. You know, weekly, monthly, major changes to the situation we're in. Really difficult to forecast COVID levels across the country. London was the first problem. Now it's the Northwest. And that changing situation has really needed regular review and reaction from ourselves, from government. And at times it feels like certainly opposition, they almost want to go back to March and say exactly, oh, you should have known exactly how it would be, exactly what would happen. Set it all in stone in March. But actually, we really have needed to review and react on a regular basis. And I think we have done that very well as a council. And you know, we've said this in the past, but this is an unprecedented pandemic. I think we as a council have reacted to it amazingly. And I think we really need to thank our staff for the amazing work they have done under such trying circumstances, month after month. We sometimes forget that in the political sphere, but the staff have been so critical to helping services continue across Peterborough. And we should be so grateful for that. Thank you, Leader.
Yeah.
Indeed, Councillor Seaton, I think that was well said. I can now move to the recommendation, which is set out on page 3, where the Cabinet is asked to note their recommendations. Are you all happy to do that? Do you want to propose a second, or are you happy that there's no objection?
That's fine. If there's no objection, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes today's meeting, does it not? Yeah. So thank you, members. I think it's been a very informative meeting, for which I thank you, and you know, both the staff and members